Assalamualaikum, and a very good afternoon to my teammate, Alia Syafira, and our respondent for today, Professor Madya, Dr. Abdul Rahman bin Abdul Rahim. So the purpose of today's interview is to talk about work ethics and issues regarding work ethics.
All right, before we officially begin with our questions, I would like to ask our respondent, Professor Abdul Rahman. So, Prof, how are you doing and how's your Ramadan going so far?
Oh, everything is good. I'm doing fine, thank you.
All right, could you introduce yourself a little bit, like how long have you been working for, and maybe share with us some of your working experience?
I've been working with you for UTM since 1989. So it has been more than 30 years. Prior to that, I was attached to two manufacturing companies, one in Penang and the other one in Port Klang. Mattel, to be specific, the company that is making the Barbie dolls. Before that, with another company from Hong Kong called Dragon and Phoenix, making garment for overseas market.
That's really interesting to know more, because from before I conduct this interview, I did search on UTM staff list, but it doesn't have much. And I also went to your LinkedIn profile. But now I think, wow, I just impressed because you have a lot of experience with working. So I guess without wasting our time, we could begin with the questions.
So for the first question, what kind of work ethic does your company practice?
Okay, currently I'm working with an institution of higher learning, a public university. So for public university, we are expected to have integrity, to be honest, and to follow the general guideline which has been set by the civil servants, by the public services department. So every one of us has to comply to that. The other one is professional ethics. I mean, if we were to do some work, for instance, to write journal papers, so we have to avoid plagiarism, for instance. So that is one of those things in which we have to comply. The other one is in terms of timeliness. We expect to teach certain number of hours according to certain schedule given to us. So that is something that everyone has to comply. We have a deadline to meet, for instance, to submit the grades, to submit the final exam questions. So those are the normal things that most lecturers are expected to do. And it has become a norm.
All right, moving on to the next question. Do you like the work ethic at your workplace?
This is not a question whether I like it or not. This is something that is expected of me to do. This is part of my job. So personally, whether you like it or not, that is something that you have to comply with. And it is similar in any place of work. You are expected to perform certain tasks because that is within your job responsibility. And of course, there are certain guidelines that you have to follow, which are set guidelines which are set up by your employers. And sometimes it is also a norm for employee to behave in certain manner because sometimes it is not written per se, but it is expected of you to follow.
So for the next question, what type of work ethic do you think is the best in the workplace setting?
I think the universal value for all workplaces is common things like honesty, integrity, responsibility, punctuality. So this is something that is norm for any workplace in anywhere in the world. Okay, so the best work ethic, it depends on the culture as well. For instance, if you live in Japan, the work ethics in Japan is a bit different from we in Malaysia. If you work with an American or European company, perhaps they have another set of work ethics. For instance, in Malaysia, being a Muslim country, if it is a prayer time, it is acceptable for you to stop your work and go to pray, take like 5 or 10 minutes. But in some countries, that might not be considered as ethical because you are expected to work at certain time of the day and you are given a break. So that is the only time that you can go and perform whatever things that you have to do. So the setting vary from country to country, from company to company. Even in Malaysia itself, I would say if you work in the public service, the work ethics is a bit different as compared to companies from the United States, for instance. Even between company to company, American company and Japanese company, the work ethic is not similar. If you were to compare even with a local company, if you work with a Japanese company, you are expected to come very early, and then you are expected to stay back late. You cannot go back if your boss is still around. So that is something that is expected of you. Not to say that this is a work ethic, but this is something that is expected of you to do. But for some company, American company, for instance, if the time is up, I mean, if you have completed your work, I mean, if you finish work at 5 o'clock, you are not expected to stay back. So again, here you can see that it is not the same from company to company.
You mentioned that the Japanese culture is a bit different. I read online that if even we are Muslim, we didn't get any leave during Raya and everything. So we must like still have to go to work. Is that correct?
I would say it depends on the company as well. If you are in Japan, probably there's not much that you can do. But I think in Malaysia, most of the Japanese companies, they have been here for many, many years. And normally for foreign company, when they set up their branch in Malaysia, they have local consultants who will consult them on certain things, on culture of the local people and whatnot. So I believe that most of the companies here in Malaysia now, they are well aware of those sensitive issues related to religion, to race. For instance, if you go to any company in Malaysia, especially the multinational corporations, even though a Malay is a minority in that particular company, they don't serve pork at the canteen. So because they are sensitive to the religion of the people of the country. Likewise, I have been to one company. They not only that they don't serve pork, they don't serve beef as well, because not to say a high number, but they have quite a few percent of their employees who are Hindu. So to be sensitive to the Hindus, they don't allow the canteen operator to serve beef at the cafeteria.
All right, moving on to the next question. From your point of view, what contributes to a good work ethic?
What contribute to a good work ethics? I think number one is probably the culture, the upbringing of the individuals, and perhaps the, personally, I think the religious background, because normally those who are more religious, this is again my personal belief, they comply to the code of ethics which are set by the employers. This is, to me, this is what contribute to a good work ethics. And the other one is the way the person is brought up by the parents. I think the schooling also affect the behavior of the individuals in later years. That's my opinion on that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. For the next question, would you say that you are an ethical worker?
Okay. Of course. How can I say no? Yeah, I think in general, most of those who work at the university, I think perhaps 99.9% of us, we are ethical, perhaps, okay? But of course, there are some people who at certain times, they perhaps due to personal problems or something like that, they fail to comply to that. But I think in general, people follow the work ethics, except for very, very few bad apples who sometimes, for some reasons, they don't comply to those. Because it depends on the line of profession as well. I think recently you read in the news that the Royal Malaysian Police, they have quite a number of their officers taking bribes from gangsters because they in that line of work, they are exposed to these bad peoples who is offering them these bribes, and it is very tempting to accept those. But for the lecturers, the work environment does not expose the lecturer to be in such circumstances. So I think that also play a big role. It depends on the organization which you are attached to. Some organization, due to the nature of its operation, the tendency for people to give bribes or to give something as a favor for something else is perhaps very much more open as compared to my organization.
All right. Moving on to the next question. From what I read online, it is quite typical to get a task beyond our capability, beyond our understanding. But it can also be a good thing, as it can be a determination booster to make us perform better at our work. So, but sometimes it is too much. So in your opinion, how much is too much?
This question is extremely subjective. For a person, that workload perhaps is a norm, but for someone else, that is perhaps is too much. But I think in my line of work as a lecturer, of course we are expected to perform certain tasks, but we are more flexible, I would say. For instance, we can set our own goals. We can set our own deadlines in terms of doing research, in terms of publication. So that is something which perhaps other organization does not have. But again, to dig a bit deeper in that, I think in this particular case, the employers or the boss, they have to be wise when they want to give certain tasks or assignment to their employees, because sometimes if the task is or the workload is too much, it will put a lot of stress to the employees, and this can be something which can have a negative effect to the employee. Some people perhaps because of the task which they beyond their capability to perform or to do, some of them they just quit and perhaps join another company. So normally companies are quite wise in giving assignment or tasks or workload to the employees, because they have to know the limitation that the employee have in terms of time, especially. And normally most big companies, they have something like a standard time. So for you to perform certain tasks, this is the normal time that we expect for you to perform. Some people, of course, they can do it fast, but the percentage is say 5%. And of course, some people, they are very slow, say another 5%. So 90% of the people, they can perform the task given in this particular period.
So for the next question, according to Muhammad Ali Hashim, Malay businessmen are more inclined to rely on their judgment as opposed to the judgment of others and do not favor the opinion of people like their subordinates, board members, and business partners. So, in your opinion, what makes you think that this has become a norm in Malaysia's work ethic?
This is again, I would say, very, very subjective. For entrepreneurs, I mean, if you start the company on your own and then you bring the company to a certain level, you make a certain amount of profit. This is what I call the entrepreneurship ego, because you are the one who start the business. So in personally, you think you know more as compared to others. And for this type of entrepreneurs, sometimes yes, they kind of hard-headed and they don't accept opinion of others because after all, they are the one who start the business. They are the one who struggle. So perhaps in their personal feeling, they know more compared to the rest. But if you are dealing with big companies, say like a public listed company, most of the managers, they are more professionals and they have board of directors for whom they have to answer to. And most of the time they have to rely on consensus because for a CEO, for instance, to make that decision on his own, it is just too high risk in certain circumstances. And if something goes wrong, he or she will be fully responsible for that. And that is not a wise thing to do if you are working with big corporations. But if you're an entrepreneur, you take the risk. If it fails, you are the one who will be dealing with the financial losses, not others.
Okay. Moving on to the next question. According to Specter and Fox 2005, every member in every organization has done counterproductive work behavior, or known as CWB. Apparently, CWB is a term that refers to dangerous employees' behavior which can affect the properties or can hurt employees affecting their efficiency. Therefore, what kind of counterproductive work behavior have you or your coworkers committed at your workplace?
In my personal opinion, I think this is much more personal to the individual rather than company-wide culture or practice. Some people, of course, they have grudges against their bosses. Sometimes they rebel. But this is very much on a personal basis. Maybe sometimes they came in late to work. Sometimes they delay their work. Absenteeism, perhaps. So these are the normal CWB, I would say, for most companies. But it is very much on a personal basis. And normally the superior, upon confronting with this kind of behavior, they will immediately take actions. And in Malaysia, we have Employment Act 1955. You cannot just fire anyone. There are few stages in which the manager has to, in this case, counsel the employees, issue a warning letter, and after that, only if the situation does not improve, then finally termination. But of course, sometimes if the employee feel that they are wrongfully terminated, then they can go to the human resource department and they can file a complaint with the employer. Because sometimes employers do abuse this, what shall I say, this practice. I mean, the employee might be good, follow all the rules, but perhaps because of personal say this, grudges between two persons. I don't like you, you don't like me, because some reason, since I'm a boss, so I will find some reason for me to kick you out. So in Malaysia, we do have a law to deal with that. It's called a wrongful termination.
Okay, so according to the American management system, 24% of working women in the United States of America are reported to have faced sexual harassment at the workplace. Do you believe that this issue is also widespread in Malaysian workplaces? And have you ever encountered it before?
I think culture-wise, perhaps it is more prevalent in some countries as compared to Malaysia. Malaysia culturally, we don't mix that. If at the workplace, the male and female normally when they go to the cafeteria or to during a conversation, it is always with the same gender, unlike the United States. So this sexual harassment at the workplace, it does exist, but it is, I would say, very isolated cases. Of course, there are people who committed this, this kind of harassment, but it is far and few, what do you call this? There's a term for that. But anyway, it is rare. I would say it is quite rare. And another one, perhaps in Malaysia, if the individual being harassed to file a complaint, it is something which is probably shameful for that particular individuals. So sometimes it is just swept under the carpet. Yeah.
All right. Next question from me. Beach 1982 has claimed that 87% of retrenchment is due to poor work ethic. So if you were a manager, how would you handle an employee with poor work ethic?
Normally, again, as I said, in this country, regardless of how poor the work ethic of the individual is, there are certain process that we have to follow. The first one is always counseling, and it has to be recorded, of course, because sometimes we don't know that this particular individual might have some personal problems, perhaps, or maybe he has health problems, financial problems. So we have to deal with that one first. And the second step is, after counseling, is to issue a warning letter, normally I think once or twice, warning letter, and then again asking the person, if you came in late, for instance, how are you going to improve that? Also, it depends on the company as well. Some company require the employees to have a written reply, that I won't be coming late and whatnot. So this is something that most people has to observe. Okay, after that, it depends on the kind of ethic as well. Sometimes how serious it is. If the person is absent from work for 3 consecutive days, by law, the person can be immediately terminated if there is no reason given to the employees. You just simply disappear, missing in action for 3 consecutive days. But if it is less, I would say, severe, just coming late to work, again, how to deal with that is a bit different. And the other one is in terms of the whether the behavior can be said as what you say this, it's a criminal behavior, perhaps. Okay, for instance, stealing something from the office and taking it back home or selling it somewhere else. So that is a very serious behavior. Probably can be charged by the police. So in some instances, even sexual harassment, for instance, it depends on the severity of the action of the persons. So if it is a sexual assault, then definitely it's going to be a police case. But just saying some certain things or just catcalling the persons of the opposite sex, perhaps it is not that severe. So the punishment is a bit different as compared to physical assault.
So going off on the previous question, How large of a role do you believe that managers of an organization have towards keeping their employees motivated as well as keeping their employees in check?
Motivation is very important because if the employee is not motivated to work, that will definitely affect the outcome of his work. So there are many ways in which the employers can motivate the employees. Financial incentive is commonly used in terms of bonus, in terms of performance incentive, in terms of pay raise, in terms of promotion. This is very common in many organizations. In some other organizations, for instance, Google in Malaysia, Google has a big operations in Malaysia. What Google has is to make the employees stay longer at the workplace. They have a free flow of food. They have a cafeteria open 24/7, and whatever served at the cafeteria is free of charge. So you can eat as much as you wish, and you don't have to pay a single cent. So this is one way to motivate people to work longer hours without being forced to. For some company, it is the work environment itself, even though the pay is not that high perhaps, but I love this workplace. People are nice. I'm not that stressful. And if I were to jump to another company, maybe I can get a higher pay, but perhaps it is more stressful. So these are the different factors that motivate people. So it's not just money per se, but there are other factors as well. For some people, this might be a cliche, but for some people who work with certain government sectors, for instance, those who work in the military, for instance, their motivation is to contribute to the country. So to defend the country. Again, as I said, it might be a cliche, but for some people, this is exactly what motivates them. So because of that, they are able to sometimes risk their life to perform their duties. Let's say, like the people in the fire services department, you can see sometimes they risk their life to save other people's life. So what motivates them to do that is basically it's my responsibility to help other people, and for that I'm willing to risk my life.
All right. Next question. The social exchange theory states that people are prone to put more effort into their work if they are rewarded. So do you believe that rewards such as salary or praise is a good motivation for employees?
Rewards in terms of salary or praise, this is short-lived. Based on many research, if one gets a promotion or raise or praise, it is short-lived. You might be motivated for a while, but after that, things goes back to normal, goes back to square one. There are other factors. I think the work environment is perhaps one of the most important things because, again, from the Maslow hierarchy of needs, so it depends as well. If you are in some countries, probably your need is at the lowest level. So what you need is just basic needs. So, but as it moves up, then the rewards is a bit different. And I think this really plays a big role in motivating people. But in Malaysia, in general, I would say it depends on your hierarchy in the organization as well. For people at the lower level, yes, perhaps a pay rise is something that they are looking for. It really motivates them. But for someone who is doing financially well, maybe pay rise motivate them as well, but not as much. So what they want is probably a challenge, perhaps. Probably they want to do something good for the company, for the community, for the country. So this is something which vary from individual to individuals. Normally those who work in the public sector, as you know, the pay of public sector employees are not as high as those who work with the private sector. For instance, if you are a medical doctor working at a government hospital, your pay is not that much as compared to your colleague who work in the specialist hospital. But when you talk to them, what motivates them is actually to assist or to help other people who can't afford to go to the private hospital. And these are the people who stay on with the government hospital. But for those doctors who are motivated by money, most of them, they won't stay long and they will go to the private sector. So you can see there are two sets of people. One is motivated by money and the other one who really work for the satisfaction to help people and whatnot, something which is highly abstract. It cannot be equalized with money. So job satisfaction is something which is very subjective. It depends on individual to individual. Money is one of those variables when it comes to motivation.
So for the next question, the general strain theory maintains that may carry out counterproductive work behavior, or CWB, to reduce work-related stress. Do you agree that committing unproductive behavior is an appropriate way to handle someone's stress?
No, it's not appropriate. We are faced with stress every day. As long as you live, every one of us is facing stress. The amount of stress, the kind of stress that we face will differ from individual to individual, even though we are in the same situation. So to do something which is counterproductive, it is, again, it will have a negative effect on that particular individual. So that is why in this case, it is extremely important to have a conducive work environment, support, counseling, support not just among employees, but perhaps support from the family as well. So all of these factors need to be counted in when dealing with stress. And again, as I said, it depends on the organizations to handle employees with this high level of stress. In Japan, if you were to read the literature, there is a term called karoshi. So karoshi is where the employee dies from work-related stress at the workplace. So this term, it doesn't exist in any country, in any other country in the world except Japan. So in Japan, because of this high amount of stress that is being put on the employees, so some of the employees, they committed suicide due to this work-related stress. And this is not common here in Malaysia, but in Japan, in their culture, sometimes you are expected to perform more than your capability. You are expected to stay longer hours. You are expected to work really hard. I mean, if you have been to Japan, it's common for people to come back late at work, late from work. Now I think the work-related stress, it is still high in Japan, but from what I read, now it is being shifted to Korea. So for those people in Korea who work with large organizations, they are under a lot of stress. I was told by one of my friends who has been to Japan in the 1970s, 1980s, he said if you were to take a train, say like 7 or 8 o'clock train or 9 o'clock train at night, you can see people in the train drunk. Because in Japan, their culture is this. So after you finish your work, say at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, normally your boss will take you out for dinner. And after dinner, they will have drink. So some people, they drank too much and then they were drunk. But when I was there in 2010, 2011, I don't see that many. I mean, it's a rare event for you to see a Japanese who is drunk inside the train. But from what I read in Korea, it's very common. Even now as we are talking today, for people to get drunk after work. So why people drink in the first place? It is perhaps due to the stress at the workplace. Yeah.
Okay, right now we are at our last question. So, lastly, what do you believe are the best ways to handle work-related stress? As you stated earlier, social factors contributes, and also the environment. So, what are other ways to handle work-related stress?
I think in this case, the employer need to educate the employees. They need to give trainings. They need to have some kind of clinics for the employees. Yeah, to um, to give them avenues for the employees to raise their concern related to stress. Uh, the thing is this: if a person has knowledge on how to positively deal with stress, he or she most likely will perhaps do that. For instance, on a personal basis, for me, if I have plenty of stress, one way to deal with that is to run. So coming back from work, uh, um, I will just put on my jogging shoe, my running shoe, my uh, running attire, and I will just run maybe for like 5 or 6 kilometers. Again, for other people, they might listen to music, and normally at many organizations now, we have counselors. Uh, Being at a public university, we have counselor who will counsel students. So not only that, their role is also to counsel other employees. And I believe that there are people who actually went to see the counselors whenever they are faced with any problems. And on the other hand, we also have ustas. So some people, they probably will approach the ustas uh, to get some kind of counseling. Counseling is very important in dealing with stress. Of course, sometimes when the case is perhaps too serious, if the counselor could not deal with that, then perhaps the counselor will refer the case to a psychiatrist. But I have yet to encounter such circumstances. But I have heard people who uh, see the counselor, because sometimes the personal problems is compounded with the work related uh, issues. So it makes the person to become very stressful. So when a person is stressful or become depressed, it is not just from one cause. Normally it has multiple causes. Probably the employers, the colleague, yeah, at the workplace, and personal problem as well. So most of the time, people who are facing with this situation, the source comes from, there are many sources that contribute to this work stress. And the best way to deal with that is, in my opinion, is counseling, or in a very severe case, to see a psychiatrist.
Okay. So you are basically saying that counseling is important, but um, in workplace, but in college and school, the counselors tend to not like keep it as a private things, and students tend to get scared to meet the counseling. So, what's your opinion on the issue?
Okay. Culturally, normally, uh, we, I mean, if we go to school, you know, culture-wise, I'm talking about culture-wise, we are trained to obey what the teacher says. Okay, you are not supposed to ask the teachers. You are supposed to listen and obey. So when you go to the universities, that same feeling is still there. So you see the counselors who is someone probably not approachable because there is a gap between the students and the counselor. So this is something which you have to change. So you have to see the counselor as your friend. It is just like when you see a policeman. So the moment you see a policeman in uniform with guns, you feel scared. You don't want to approach that particular individuals because there are two reasons. Number one, maybe you think you might do something wrong, perhaps, okay? And the other one, we see policemen as someone who is always against the public, perhaps, okay? So that is something which we have to change. So if you see a counselor as a friend, and the counselor is there to help you, not to be against you. So it will change the way the student perceive the counselor. So in this particular case, I think perhaps if you have an academic advisor, probably the academic advisor is normally your lecturer. So if the case is, just to give you one example, when I was in Skoda Johor, I think maybe like 20 years back, I have one student, a girl. I think she is in her third year, and she has hepatitis B. So hepatitis B is a very serious disease, and there is no cure for that. She came and see me, saying that she has hepatitis B. And hepatitis B can actually, you can actually infect another person from or through body fluid. Yeah. So I don't know how to advise her. So how to counsel her, because it is beyond my knowledge. So I advised her to go and see the counselor, and I actually did call the counselor saying that I have this particular student who has this situation, and will you be able to advise her? And I believe my students went and see the counselor. During that time, she was doing her diploma. And after that, she continued with her degree at the same university. And I believe that the counselor has successfully counseled her. And she has the motivation to continue with her study. Even she has this situation. There is also another case. This particular employee, he has HIV, okay? And I'm not quite sure whether he went to see the counselor or not. But what this guy has is a very strong support from his co-workers. So his friends really, really support him, and it makes him very strong. And of course, when a person is diagnosed with HIV, of course, he will feel very depressed. Initially, that is what he feels. But when he get this support from his co-workers, a very, very strong support from his co-workers, so he is able to stand up and be strong. And today he is under medication, and he is able to function as any other employees. So again, being human, you need this support in terms of counseling, in terms of moral support from family, from co-workers, advice from counselors, from ustaz, because at the end of the day, it's still the spiritual things that actually play a big role in us in order to deal with whatever problem or stress that we are facing. That will be my response to that.
All right. So I believe we have come to the end of our session regarding work ethic for sociology course. Both of us would like to thank you, Prof, for your time today as well as your knowledge.
Right.
It's my
That's true,
pleasure.
Marissa. We have gained a lot of input regarding work ethic. And again, we would like to thank you for to our respondents, Professor Madya, Dr. Abdul Rahman bin Abdul Rahim. And we would like to wish you to have a blessed Ramadan and have a good day.
Thank you so much. It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Alright.
Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.